Hello everyone, I am the MainManeMaine Brony, and I am back. And I've got a new story that has been specifically requested by the author. He asked around on Fanfiction for a dramatic reading of one of his stories, and I decided to answer. And he is letting me read this, fanfic is Crapsack, which is I've read this story before, and, what I can sum it up is 1/3 parody comedy, 1/3 commentary on fanfictions in general, especially bad fanfictions, and 1/3 what the f*** is going on. Okay, so, anyway, you'll see soon enough. Anyway, Mr. Reality Check, I can't thank you enough, and, let's begin. Fanfic is Crapsack, Chapter 1. It took less than a week after Cadence and Shining Armor's wedding for Equestria to go completely to hell. Twilight was busy with her books, as always, when Rarity, of all ponies, staggered in through the door. The normally fabulous and fastidious pony looked like, well, she looked like hell. Her coat was scruffy and unkempt. Her hair was disheveled, an unheard of thing, and her normally carefully polished hooves looked chipped and cracked. Twilight could see bags under the unicorn's carefully made-up eyes, and the unicorn wasn't sure, but she thought the pony looked thinner, malnourished. "Oh, Twilight, I don't know who to turn to! You must help me!" the fashion pony wailed. Before Twilight knew what was happening, the most successful and high-culture pony in Ponyville was all but prostrate at her feet, sobbing out a tale of calamity and woe worthy of Charles Dickens on a cocaine bender. Twilight repeated what she had just been told, slowly and carefully, to make sure she hadn't misheard anything. "Let me get this straight. You couldn't pay your taxes." Rarity nodded. "So you bribed the mayor for more time." Rarity nodded again, head hanging lower. "With a sapphire necklace." A surprisingly Fluttershy-like whimper came out of the white unicorn. Twilight face-huffed so hard she saw stars. "And it never occurred to you that a sapphire necklace could probably pay your taxes 10 times over?" And, Twilight realized, it never occurred to the mayor either. And it also hadn't occurred to the mayor that trotting around with a sparkly bribe around your neck was a good way to end a career in politics very quickly. Had the mayor been eating loco weed or something? Rarity looked puzzled for a moment. Then she glanced aside and pawed at the floor with one hoof. "Well, I was so flustered when she suggested, and the way how she phrased it about certain favors, it threw me off, and..." What she said next had Twilight's jaw on the floor. "You thought she was asking to have sex with you?" There was a thump of something falling to the floor. The two ponies glanced over in puzzlement. Over in the corner, Spike was standing on a ladder, a stack of books in his hand, half raised back to the shelf, pupils shrunk to dots, face frozen in a peculiar expression, as certain visions involving a white unicorn and a gray mare flickered across his brain. His eye twitched slightly. "I'm not sure how I feel about this," he muttered. "Spike?" Twilight snapped. "Right, back to work, shelving books, didn't hear a thing." Spike hastily stuffed the books on the shelf and scrambled down the ladder, heading for safer territory, somewhere else in the library. When the eavesdropping dragon had clattered out of earshot, Twilight turned her attention back to Rarity. "Let's get back to the point. How on earth did you come to the conclusion that the mayor was a filly fooler?" "Well, I didn't say it, thankfully." "Oh, ew!" The purple unicorn grimaced and made ick-get-off motions with her hooves. And she's like old enough to be your mother! Yeah! Twilight shook herself all over. Ugh. It's a good thing you didn't say anything. If you thought you were in trouble before, imagine if you'd said anything. Where on earth did you get the idea she was... Rarity blinked, suddenly surprised. Her eyes flickered nervously, like an actress who'd suddenly forgotten her lines. I honestly don't know, she admitted, puzzled. She tapped one porcelain hoof to her chin. It's not like she's ever done anything one can construe as... well... She frowned. Maybe I heard a rumor someplace? Twilight gave her a deadpan look. Rarity's appetite for juicy, lowbrow gossip was proving to be a long-term headache. Okay, moving on. Let's address the main issue here. Which is, Rarity said, distracted. How the heck can you be broke? Twilight spluttered. You find gemstones with your horn! You dragged home 4 wagon loads of them just a few months back! You sold 6 jewel-crusted costumes to the Pony of Pomp! I could buy a castle the size of Canterlot with what she spent on those! And that commission by Hoity-Toity would have funded the staff for it for a year! How could even Rarity simply give away so much clothing and jewelry that she was starving in the streets broke? How could Rarity be behind on taxes anyway? Rarity did community service every year. Winter wrap-up, the running of the leaves, decorations for the summer sun celebration. If anything, the mayor probably owed Rarity money. Another thought struck her. She poked her fashionista friend in one skinny flank. And why are you going hungry? Rarity looked offended. I told you, it's not as if I had money to spare. You've got to be kidding me! You're a horse! You eat grass! You eat hay! You could just walk out into the nearest open field and eat your fill! Rarity gaped at her. Eating grass like a... Pony, Twilight deadpanned. I repeat, college student. I know about being short on food. Plenty of times when it was a choice between grazing in the courtyard and eating ramen noodles. Trust me, pick the grass. The purple unicorn paused and drew a breath. Anyway, as if your friends would let you get that far. You've got one friend who's a farmer and another who's a baker. You can't get within hooves reach of either of them without them trying to fatten you up. Twilight couldn't help flashing back to her first day in Ponyville. The Apple Clan had roped her into a brunch, quote-unquote, that nearly left her an apple-stuffed unicorn. And how could anyone get rib-bone skinny with Pinkie Pie's cakes and punch around? Rarity, we're your friends. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you ask for help? Even Applejack hadn't let her mule's stubborn pride reach this point. Rarity looked away. A silent tear slid down her cheek. Because I don't deserve it, she said. The only reason anyone tolerates me is because I'm generous. Then if I ever stop being generous, then nobody would ever like me again. Because I'm such a vain and shallow creature. Twilight just stared at her. She felt herself getting more bewildered with every sentence. Rarity's pain was obviously real, but everything she was saying sounded like she was reading it from a script. An incredibly bad script. It was a litany of self-loathing and ridiculously disproportionate self-recrimination. It was like something written up by those silly foals at the cafe who dyed their manes and tails black, wore too much eyeliner, and covered their cutie marks with rub-on tattoos of skulls and onks. Horse apples, she said. Look, you just go get your receipts and your bank records and whatever. We'll go on over and have a talk with the mayor after lunch and have her go through the Ponyville records and make a few pointed remarks to the mayor about bribery laws, she added mentally. And we'll get this worked out. Elsewhere in Ponyville, The upper room above Sugar Cube Corner was strangely dark. Curtains were drawn, all lights extinguished. A bright pink pony with cotton candy mane and tail sat alone in the center of the floor. No, check that. A bright pink pony and a small toothless crocodile sat alone in the center of the floor. The pony rhythmically stroked the crocodile's belly with one hoof as she murmured and giggled to herself in a truly disturbing fashion. Yes, yes, new cupcakes with a special ingredient. We'll have to invite Rainbow Dash over for that. Her manic, glaze-eyed expression suddenly crumpled like a lump of sugar in warm tea. Her mane drooped. In a trice, she went from wild-eyed giggling to hopeless weeping. But she won't come. Nobody will come. Nobody likes my parties anymore. I'm so tired of trying to be happy all the time. Without warning, she suddenly became manic again. Well, we'll just have to do something about that, won't we, Gummy? She said, giggling breathily. She picked up the gator and tossed him in the air, catching him again. Oh yes, we'll have fun games with our friends, she said in a sing-song voice. She spun in a circle in her chair and caught a glimpse of herself in the dresser mirror. The Pinky in the mirror wasn't quite the same as the one in front of it. Her normally bright pink coat was dull. Her mane and tail hung in flat iron folds rather than floating about in a cotton candy frizz. The heavy-lidded, surly expression was as far from Pinky's normal cheerful behavior, or from her current psychotic mania, as it could possibly get. The reflection spoke. Oh, not this again. There was a shift, a ripple in the air. Instantly, Pinky's coat dimmed to match the mirror. Her mane and tail deflated like a depressed party balloon, hanging like limp string. The pink party pony turned away from the mirror, the cynical expression in the reflection now her own. Well, here we go again. Screw it. Might as well get started. Pinkamena set down Gummy and opened her dresser. In the bottom drawer were all the tools she needed for just such a situation. The Cutie Mark Crusaders were in deep trouble. Not that trouble was anything unusual for them, but this time it was on a whole new level. The three fillies were running through the orchards as fast as their tiny legs could carry them. The trees were barely visible in the twilight gloom, which was exceedingly peculiar as it was nearly noon. Not that the three fillies were in any position to appreciate this fact. Applebloom was weeping hysterically. Poor Sweetie Belle had wet herself in fear. Scootaloo was darting frantic looks left and right as they ran, terrified that she wouldn't see the monster coming, and just as terrified that she would. Their desperate panting filled the oppressively heavy air as they ran for their lives. Applebloom skidded to a halt and let out a scream. The other two screeched to a halt next to her, wailing in terror. Mere yards ahead, the monster stood facing them. It was impossible. They had run forever, and yet somehow it had caught up and passed them, and now stood waiting for them. It was almost like a pony. Almost. It was impossibly tall and thin, taller than even Princess Celestia, nearly all of its height given to its insanely long, gangling legs. It was coal black, save for its white flank mark, a circle crossed out with an X, and its bare white head. It had no tail, no mane, and most horribly of all, no face. It saw its prey and let out a mouthless shriek that drilled their ears from the inside. They hadn't seen where it had come from. It had simply stepped out of nowhere from behind the trees, into their path. It, in turn, never saw a Pinkamena Diane Pie step out of nowhere from behind itself. The three fillies gaped in surprise as the cotton candy pink pony simply appeared from behind the gangling horror. She saw the girls, gave them a little wave and a manic grin, spun around, planted her forehooves on the ground, and kicked with her back hooves straight up between the slender pony's hind legs. Despite her panic, a small part of Applebloom was impressed. Pinky had bucked straight and true and had planted both hooves, as Applejack might have put it, right where the slender pony's trunk forked. There was a solid, meaty thump. The slender pony's back legs folded together like jackstraws. It had no eyes, no nose, and no mouth, yet somehow its blank visage transformed into a most wondrous expression of surprise. The thin, piercing shriek spiraled upward into octaves too high to hear, and with a falsetto squeak, the monster toppled forward like a felled pine.
"Hello, girls," Pinky said cheerfully. Give me just a minute."
She produced a rope from nowhere, and proceeded to hog-tie the insensate monster with ruthless efficiency. That done, she produced a pink glitter pen, and, for reasons none of the fillies could fathom, began drawing crossed-out O's all over the slender pony's body and face. The creature howled and writhed as if the marker were a branding iron.
"Oh, shut it,"
Pinkamena said, giving the thing a kick in the belly as she scribbled away.
"It's your own fault for crossing over into a place like this."
The shrieks faded to scratchy whimpers. Shortly, the creature was decorated from nose to hoof with glittery X's and O's. Pinky admired her hoofcraft, nodded in satisfaction, and put the pen away. She flipped her long, straight hair out of her face and trotted over to where the Crusaders stood, rooted to the spot, jaws dangling. "Are you girls all right?" She didn't have to wait for an answer. They flung themselves at their savior and clung to her like a life raft. After a few seconds of awkward crying and hysterical babbling and comfort squeezing, she pushed them back. Pinky was all for hugs, but they made Pinkamena uncomfortable.
"Scootaloo, Sweetie Belle, do me a favor, would you?"
She handed each of them a cast-iron frying pan.
"I need to speak to Applebloom for a second."
She pointed back at the hog-tied creature.
"Watch him. If he moves, whack him in the head."
The two ponies nodded and stood over the prone monster, skillets at the ready. Pinkamena looked Applebloom in the eyes. "Now, Applebloom,
Clang, 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 clang. I said if he moves, girls,"
Pinkamena said over her shoulder.
"I saw him twitch,"
Scootaloo said. Pinkamena sighed and rolled her eyes.
"Whatever. Okay, Applebloom, you don't need to worry anymore. You take Scoot and Sweetie up to your house, get cleaned up, have some cookies and milk, go to bed. I promise that everything will be fixed in the morning."
Applebloom's eyes welled with tears.
But the monster, it got Applejack and Big Macintosh to it." "What are you talking about, Sweetie? There they are,"
Pinkamena said, pointing to the farmhouse, now in sight. There was a shift, a ripple in the air. Applebloom looked where Pinky was pointing. There, silhouetted in the doorway, was Big Macintosh, calmly chewing a stalk of grass. Applejack was next to him, looking over the farm anxiously, obviously wondering where her little sister had gotten to. Applebloom's grief turned to bewilderment.
"But I saw it. I saw it take them and—" "Now that's enough," Pinkamena said firmly. "No more talking about it, okay? You've had a horrible day, but that's all over. Just go on up and do as I said." What's going on?"
Applebloom said plaintively. First this horrible monster, and now Pinky was acting so... not Pinky. It made no sense. Pinkamena felt a tug of sympathy. Children, especially ones who lived in a sugar bowl like Equestria, just weren't meant to go through this sort of thing.
"Some bad ponies have been making a mess of Ponyville," Pinkamena explained. "That's the best I can tell you right now. But don't worry, your Auntie Pinky will fix it all up."
She patted Applebloom awkwardly on the head.
"Now, don't you think you shouldn't keep your brother and sister waiting?"
Applebloom's tear-streaked face was suddenly wreathed in joy. She bolted for the farmhouse, calling her brother and sister's name. After a couple of final vengeful clangs to their nemesis's head, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo dropped their frying pans and bolted after her. Pinkamena sighed in relief. It wouldn't matter if the girls told their horror story to Applejack and Big Macintosh, really. By now the memory was probably already fading. With any luck, the mess would be healed over as if it never was before the next sunrise. Pinkamena turned back to her turkey trust victim.
With any luck, even if they do remember, they'll only remember all this as a bad dream, she said to the faceless pony. But all the same, you sad sack of wet troll backwash, she gave the creature a punt someplace tender. You traumatized a bunch of little girls for your sick giggles, and that makes Pinky a mad pony. She took the loose end of the rope, binding the slender pony, and threw it over a low-hanging branch. Spitting on her hooves, she began hoisting the slender pony up into the air. And I think that calls for you and me to have a little party.
She tied off the rope and stepped back.
I don't know about Pinky, but do you know what my favorite part of a party is?
Once again, she pulled something from her trademark hammer space, a large baseball bat studded with nails.
The pinata.
Her bubbly grin turned to a malevolent smirk.
Let's find out if you're full of delicious candy.
So let me get this straight. Twilight stared up at the mound of mint-green horseflesh before her. Roundabout yesterday, Bonbon, you realized you had this compulsion. Bonbon, who was standing nearby, pawed one hoof through the dust and nodded. A compulsion to fatten up Lyra. Bonbon's only reaction to this was to turn an even brighter shade of red. So you talked Lyra into coming down to Sugar Cube Corner and began plying her with sweets until this happened. Twilight waved a hoof in the general direction of the greenish mound before her. It was, in truth, Lyra, swollen to impossible proportions, and wedged solidly in the front door of Sugar Cube Corner, an immobile ball of rolling fat with 4 tiny feet and a tiny unicorn head just barely sticking out. The mint-green unicorn looked as ashamed and humiliated as it was possible for a pony to look. And all that happened, Twilight went on, in 2 hours? She croggled. This is scientifically and biologically impossible. The sheer calor... Lyra, why didn't you stop when you saw what was happening? Lyra tried to lick the chocolate smears off her own face. But the cakes were so tasty, I couldn't help myself. Tears of shame started rolling down her enormous cheeks. Even as grotesque as she was, the sight was one of heartstring-tugging pathos. Bonbon sympathetically patted her friend with one hoof. There, it'll be okay, she said. Don't worry, you're always beautiful to me. Her expression changed oddly. She began rubbing her cheek against Lyra's grossly distended belly folds. A lascivious smirk spread across her face. In fact, I kind of like you this way. Twilight stood there staring. Her expression was indescribable. Almost as indescribable as the one crossing Lyra's face. What is this load of happy horse apples? She demanded, of no one in particular. From behind Twilight, a certain purple and green snarker could be heard to mutter, Chubby chaser! Spike! Mrs. Cake was standing next to her. Didn't you know, dearie? She asked. Lyra and Bonbon are... She looked around and whispered, an item, you know. Twilight wasn't sure what the hoof gestures Mrs. Cake was making were supposed to mean, but she could guess. She gawked at the pastry chef, flabbergasted. Since when? Mrs. Cake looked flustered. She hesitated for a moment, seemingly confused, then tried another tack. Goodness, you led such a sheltered life before coming here, didn't you, dear? A sheltered life? In Canterlot? The sarcasm in Twilight's voice could have etched metal. I was in college, Mrs. Cake, not sealed in a barrel. I've seen a few grad student parties, and believe me, I've seen things that would curl your mane. I know what you're talking about. But I also know for a fact that Lyra's dating a boy, and I saw Bon Bon with her husband and Philly at the meteor shower party just 2 weeks ago. What, did everyone decide that Lyra and Bon Bon had to be lesbians because they sit on the same park bench at lunch?
Mrs. Cake's eyes glazed. She seemed to struggle with assimilating what Twilight had said. Well, people, do change, dearie, she said haltingly.
Oh, for crying out... Twilight closed her eyes. Never mind. Forget it. Focus, Twilight. Focus. Okay, look, I'm going to do some research. This swelling up thing has to be some sort of magic effect. Maybe Poison Joke got in the cake batter or something. Bon Bon, stop nuzzling Lyra's belly fat like that. It looks unwholesome. And once we get Lyra out of your front door, I'm going to find whatever's making every pony in town a crazy person and fix it. Okay. So, hopefully that was to your liking, Mr. Reality Check. And, please, leave some feedback. Please leave a like if you want to hear more. I'm definitely going to read more of this because, Mr. Reality Check, if Mr. Reality Check, you want more of it, please just let me know. And, yes, this is a relatively short fanfiction, around 28,000 words, but it's one of the better fanfictions around. It's a bit dark, and as you can tell, with a few sexual connotations, but nothing nothing graphic, and, so yeah, that was Fanfic is Crapsack, Chapter 1, and, stay brony.